Greetings, everyone. My name is Mabafokeng Hoeane. I am a curator as well as a conservator in cultural heritage. I'm based currently in Pretoria in South Africa. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Pretoria in visual studies. I'm currently looking at the ceremonial beats of the Zulus in the Nangoma area in the KwaZulu-Natal area. Today, I'll be presenting the conservation and curation of African sacred objects, which is an ongoing research project, as well as the findings were part of my master's dissertation. And today we'll be looking at the case study of Dinkho tsa Badimo, which are ancestral ceramic vessels of the Basotho and the Batswana of the Southern African region. Introduction. Over time, religious African ceramic vessels such as Dinkho tsa Badimo ancestral vessels have lost their identity and what they mean to the people who consider them sacred and spiritual objects in museum collections. The lack of scholarly discussion of these religious symbols has negatively impacted on the conservation practices by undervaluing the identification and retention of these meaningful objects. The purpose of this study is to help fill the literature gap by introducing how the objects can be identified from other household vessels, such as those used for cooking. The overarching aim is to draw attention to these objects and encourage the identification, documentation, and preservation of Dinkho tsa Badimo by the conservation community. By involving conservation in the identification, documentation, and preservation of Dinkho tsa Badimo, I hope to further the growing interest in African sacred objects research. In time, this may lead to more effective methods for the identification, preservation, and overall understanding of African sacred objects such as Dinkho tsa Badimo. Overview. So in today's presentation, we're gonna look at African sacred objects. I'm gonna look at some examples across the continent. I'm gonna look at the Basotho and Botswana of Southern Africa as Dinkho are produced by them. So Dinkho is ceramic vessels, which is a plural, and Nkho will be singular. Dinkho tsa Badimo are ancestral vessels. So Dinkho are all the ceramic vessels. Dinkho tsa Badimo are ancestral vessels. I'll also be looking at the spirituality of the Basotho-Batswana, as Dinkho tsa Badimo play a major role in the spirituality of the Basotho and Botswana. Dinkho tsa Badimo as a museum object, and then the conservation practice and ethics, which were drawn from my research, my dissertation research, and the findings that I got from the research. African sacred objects. So when I speak of African sacred objects, I speak of objects that are used during religious ceremonies and rituals, objects used as mediums to connect to ancestors or represent ancestors, objects considered to be living objects. Such objects are fed and cared for as living objects. So let's look at examples. I have 6 examples there. The first one is the Tika dolls, which are associated with fertility and are made with terracotta clay. These dolls are found or are made in Cameroon by the Teka people, which is in West Africa. The next example is the Yoruba Osani, which are also known as sacred Remi's head, from the Uwo region in Nigeria in West Africa. The heads are made with wood. Osami heads honor ancestors and are thought to embody the chief and his powers to bestow fertility and success on his people. The heads are found in ancestral altars and shrines of royals, chiefs, and Yoruba leaders. The second one is the blue blah and the blue blah bean, spirit spells figures from the Baul people of Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. So the Baul believed that in the other world called Blue, all human beings were married before birth. These spirit spouses called Blubabian, meaning spiritual husband, and Blublobla, meaning spirit wife, follow them into their human lives by way of human figure sculptures called waka scrum, or person in wood. Well, people carve these figures to represent the other world spouses, and they believe that these spirits have influence over the human lives. Our next example is the Ikuku fertility dolls, which is made out of mixed materials such as beads, wood, metal, and hair. These dolls are from the Tukani people. So this type of doll is carved by the father for a maturing daughter. The Tukani people believe that if the girl treats the doll as a real baby, she'll be successful and she'll bear a child. The next one is the Kuba palm wine cup, Mwabugniti, from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Central Africa, which are carved from wood. The carved drinking vessels served as a sign of the authority of a Kuba chief. These drinking vessels are used in the ritual drinking of palm wine. Our last example is the Namji fertility doll from the Cameroon in West Africa. It's made also with mixed materials such as cotton and beads. Namjis are given to encourage fertility. They're made for young girls to play with and treated as a child, and they're kept by women for good luck when they're trying to fall pregnant. So, as you can see, across the continent, there are different types of sacred objects or spiritual objects. And these objects, I think one key is that they have few human-like figures, which is not the case with our main act for today, which is Dinkho Badimo. But before we get to Dinkho Badimo, I wanted to give examples across the continent how different types of sacred objects are made from different materials, and they have different meanings and embody different meanings. And I thought by giving the background that there's diverse in sacred objects, and to give a background into Southern African sacred objects and how they look alike. But let's start with looking at the Basotho and the Batswana of Southern Africa, where Dinkho come from. So the Basotho and the Batswana are found in 3 countries in Southern Africa, which is Botswana, which is the one in red there, and the one in green that you can see is South Africa, and the one where there's blue is Lesotho. So there are 3 groups within the Basotho and Botswana. The blue is the Southern Sothos, who are found in Lesotho, who are found in the Free State region, in the Gauteng region, in the Mpumalanga region, and in the Eastern Cape region. The second group is the Bapedi, who are found in the northern region, in the Limpopo and in the Mpumalanga region in South Africa. And then the Tswana group are found in both Botswana and in South Africa. And in South Africa, they are found in the Northern Cape region and in the Northwest region and some parts of the Limpopo region, as well as the Free State region. spirituality of the Basotho and Botswana is that they believe in Modimo and they believe in Badimo, the ancestors. So there's always a mistake that we worship ancestors, but just like in Christianity, where you have angels and you have God, is the same way that applies with the Basotho and the Botswana, is that we see our ancestors as sort of our angels who can communicate on our behalf with God. Well, when you ask something. So we perform rituals during births, during funerals, during weddings. During birth is to introduce a child, and during funerals will be to say that someone has departed, and during weddings it will be to bring two families together. And we perform rituals to appease the ancestors and to ask for blessings, which is called Hupahla. Dinkho and Badimo play a major role in rituals associated with ancestors. So with the births, there will be offerings given, as well as in the funerals, as well in the weddings. And in rituals to appease God, you also, appease the ancestors, you also would find Dinkho and Badimo there. So the potters are traditionally women, but in recent times, males have been training in potters, and the skills were usually passed down from one generation to the next generation, as you can see at the photo there at the bottom. The interest in the traditional methods of production of the pots, however, has been recently dying out with people moving to the cities or young people not being interested in learning the traditional methods of production, which is very concerning. As I mentioned, there are different types of Dinkho. So traditionally, Dinkho, the ceramic vessels play a vital role in the everyday lives of the Basotho and Botswana. Dinkho have various uses for daily activities, such as the preparation of cooking, serving, and storing food, which will be known as Dinkho tsa dijo, and beverages such as beer and water. So the one that stores beer will be called Dinkho tsa bojalwa, and the ones that will store water will be known as Dinkho tsa metsi. Contemporarily also, Dinkho are being used as decorative objects, as you can see at the first picture there and the second picture. And this goes according to someone's taste. And the two at the bottom are examples. The third one is the ones that store water or beer, and then the fourth one will be something that stores food. So Dinkho tsa Badimo are ceramic vessels used for ancestral rituals and ceremonies, like I've mentioned, the weddings, the funerals, the births, to appease the ancestors. And there are three forms of ownership of Dinkho tsa Badimo. The first form is Dinkho tsa Badimo passed down from generation to generation when one inherits the vessel from a deceased family member. So maybe your grandmother passes away and then it's passed down to you. The second one is Dinkho that belong to the family as a collective and is stored at the family homestead. So usually the person that will take care of it or that will offer to it would be the oldest member of the family. And then the third one is a personal one, when the owner purchases or gets the vessel made on their behalf. So because a lot of people are not able to frequent their homestead, they would make a personal one where they're in the city where they can still appraise their ancestors, so they don't have to wait, let's say, for holidays to go home to be able to communicate with the ancestors. So people lately, on recent times, have been making personal dinkhos, which some would have been passed down from a family member. So Dinkho tsa Badimo as museum objects. So the study that I did was at Dinkho National Museum of Cultural History in Pretoria in South Africa. And the collection is massive and it compromises of other clay pots from other tribes. And the historical context of the museum collection in South Africa is that the objects, specifically objects such as Dinkho tsa Badimo, were forcefully taken, and there were laws that allowed this, such as the Witchcraft Subtraction Act of 1933 and the Land Act of 1957. So people were encouraged to give up the objects that they used to appraise the ancestors or pray to ancestors and follow Christianity. And in doing that, they were supposed to leave them at the churches, and the churches would donate them to the museums, and that's how they got to collections such as Dinkho's collection. And the role of the organizations such as UNESCO and outcomes in setting conservation principles in intangible heritage conservation is that as much as they're set protocols, these protocols are not across board, as I found while doing my research, because Dinkho tsa Badimo, as it sits right now, they're not even treated as sacred objects in the collections. And across many museums in Southern Africa, there's a lot of sacred objects that are not being handled and treated as sacred objects. Yet UNESCO says that these objects should be treated as so. But on ground, that has not been happening. That's what I noticed while doing my research. Like I said, currently, as I previously said, currently collection practice in South African museums is that objects such as Dinkho tsa Badimo are treated like any other objects. There is currently no special treatment of the objects, and they're just put on the shelves with all the other objects. So the traditional care of Dinkho tsa Badimo is that when you clean the Dinkho, you use spring water, such as river water, and as far as storage, you store it in a cool, dry, and dark area. So you perform ceremony, let's say, with the personal one, you perform a ceremony. Once the ceremony is performed, you clean it with your river water, spring water, and then you store it in a dry, cool, dark area. That's the traditional care of Dinkho tsa Badimo. That's what I got from people that own, different people that I interviewed that own Dinkho tsa Badimo. That's how they clean, and that's how they have been storing their Dinkhos in their personal spaces. So my recommendation and conclusion is that Dinkho tsa Badimo should be stored along with other sacred objects in the DNCHM storage, specifically dedicated to other culturally sensitive and spiritually significant objects. If the above is not possible, Dinkho tsa Badimo should be grouped together on a separate shelf. The shelf should be clearly labeled as containing sacred objects to make the staff aware that there are potential protocols to be followed when accessing and handling these objects. Isolating each ceramic in its own custom-made archival box and clearly labeling the box also be possible to separate the sacred from other household vessels. Keep them in the dark and contaminate free. However, this does have a resource implication for a collection as large as the one at Dinkho, and a lot of museums in Africa don't have the resources to be able to, have archival boxes for each ceramic vessel. Handling of this object should be done by an older staff member, preferably trained to deal with spiritual objects or with the assistance of a traditional healer. There were no gender-based cultural restrictions identified, and so this should not limit staff from handling Dinkho tsa Badimo. As best museum practice already involves handling objects with clean or gloved hands, this should be observed when handling Dinkho tsa Badimo also. Questions or comments? Thank you very much. Tamaku lesedi ha le kganye.